The woman was shocked to discover that her usually honest and upright husband was secretly dating his female colleague. Not only were they intimate, but they even walked into the hotel together. However, the woman didn't expose her on the spot, instead clinging to a glimmer of hope. She followed all the way to room 206. But as soon as she reached the door, a terrible sound came from inside. The voice was like a knife, tearing apart her last bit of dignity. Anger instantly clouded her mind. She turned and grabbed the fire extinguisher in the corner of the hallway, preparing to break in. A child in the nearby hallway caught her attention by a conversation with his mother. The child's voice was like a bucket of cold water, suddenly pouring over Li Bao's head, instantly calming her down. She realized that once the door broke, the home would be completely lost. But whenever she thought of how affectionate her husband was with others, she still couldn't swallow her anger. So she walked out of the hotel. She resolutely called the police via public phone. I want to report this. In the alley 3 opposite the Chuxiong building, in a room on the 20th floor of Taoyuan Hotel, someone is soliciting prostitutes. Not long after hanging up, a police car sped over. Li Baoli thought this was a punishment for her husband. She didn't know that this phone call would mark the beginning of a tragedy in her life, making every day feel like she was pierced by 1,000 arrows. In fact, the reason her husband cheated was because of a recent move. That morning, Li Baoli had arranged to visit the movers early, but the alley was too narrow, and trucks couldn't get into the alley. Seeing that they had to carry dozens of meters more, the workers immediately demanded extra payment. Li Baoli thought this was a bargain and argued with the workers. Li Baoli looked up at her husband for help, but Ma Shuowu immediately pulled his head back. That moment of retreat was like a fine needle stabbing Li Baoli's heart. Whenever something happened, he always hid behind him, letting her rush forward alone. With no other choice, Li Baoli gritted her teeth and agreed to pay more. But her anger had nowhere to vent, so she kept nitpicking on the workers while working. After moving, as soon as the workers unloaded their things, Ma Shuowu handed them a few cigarettes and told their son to go downstairs to buy soda. Seeing this, Li Baoli's pent-up anger was instantly ignited. Ma Shuowu, I pay for their work, it's only right for them to do it. Just now, they raised prices over there, and you didn't say a word, and now you're out handing out cigarettes? Cigarettes don't cost anything? Sodas don't cost anything? Do you think this is just a factory hosting a hospitality? Cheap to be born with. The worker heard this and quickly tactfully left. Ma Shuowu stood there, his face flushed red, like a child who had done something wrong. He wished he could crawl into a hole in the ground. At the factory, he was a respected director, but at home and in front of his wife, all his dignity seemed to be trampled underfoot. The movers couldn't help but tease him to his face. Although we do the hard work, the wives inside the house are quite virtuous. Life is much more comfortable than yours. I can tell. Outside, you're a cadre, at least a cadre. But so what? You've been ruined by a woman like this for your whole life. You really are a sin. These words made Ma Shuowu so ashamed, he couldn't lift his head. He could only quietly take money out of his wallet and send them away. Li Baoli overheard the workers' conversations and trembled with anger. She cursed and rushed out. Fortunately, the workers left quickly, or else she would have been scolded again. That night, Li Baoli made a few side dishes and even opened a bottle of wine, wanting to drink with Ma Shuowu to celebrate the move. But Ma Shuowu kept a cold face the whole time, not saying a word. Fortunately, Li Baoli was in a good mood after moving to a new home and, unusually, didn't argue with him. But no one expected that just before going to bed, Ma Shuowu suddenly asked her for a divorce. Li Baoli was stunned, and before she could recover, Ma Shuowu hugged his pillow and went to the living room. Li Baoli thought to herself that he must be sulking about moving during the day. He had made a scene before, but it would be fine in a couple of days. After all, she knew Ma Shuowu's personality, timid and indecisive, and who would dare to actually bring up divorce. But in the days that followed, Ma Shuowu left early and returned late every day, ignoring her, and at night slept on the sofa without fail. Only then did Li Baoli truly panic. She realized this matter might have really escalated. She wanted to save the marriage. Li Baoli hurried to seek help from her best friend. She thought her best friend would marry into a wealthy family and live a smooth life, and that she would be able to offer her some advice. But it turned out her best friend's situation was even worse. Her best friend took off her sunglasses, revealing clear bruises on her eyes, looking very disheveled. Her best friend choked up and told Li Baoli that her husband not only cheated, but also brought the woman home and even physically assaulted her. Hearing this, Li Baoli's nose tingled. It turned out that behind those seemingly glamorous marriages there were also hidden grievances and humiliations unknown to others. Thinking of her own situation, she couldn't hold back anymore, tears streaming down her face. Her best friend told her, "That damn thing, I didn't lose out. I caught him, scared me to death. He couldn't even go out. He went to his mom's place. and he even gave me 80,000 yuan. I really didn't lose out. Her best friend mistakenly thought Li Baoli was feeling sad for her and forced herself to show off her victory. Li Baoli's eyes were red, and she choked up as she revealed that Ma Xiuwu was going to get divorced. Her best friend widened her eyes in surprise after hearing this, because in her memory, the usually timid Ma Xiuwu, how could he possibly have the courage to bring up divorce? Seeing Li Baoli's sad expression, her best friend promised to do her best to persuade Ma Xiuwu to see if there was any room to turn things around. When he arrived at Li Baoli's house and saw that Ma Xiuwu had not yet returned, her best friend first came to the balcony of her new home, thoughtfully looked around the surroundings, then returned inside and began giving Li Baoli some advice. She told Li Baoli that if she wanted a divorce, she should keep a close eye on her bank book, house, and other assets. If she still wants to keep living, she had to find a way to keep Ma Xiuwu by her side and couldn't be as tough as before. But what her friend didn't know was that at the same time, Ma Xiuwu was dining with his factory colleague Zhou Fun. In this event without Li Baoli, Ma Xiuwu was finally able to let go of his usual suppression. No one listened to what he said at home, and Li Baoli's assertiveness left him without the courage to express his thoughts. But in front of Zhou Fun, he could speak freely. Ma Xiuwu was somewhat knowledgeable. He spoke clearly about work and life, with a hint of insight in his words. Zhou Fun listened attentively, her eyes full of admiration. This feeling of being recognized and appreciated was something Ma Xiuwu had never experienced before. With Li Baoli, all he received was accusations and ridicule. But with Zhou Fun, he found a long-lost sense of self-respect. That day, Ma Xiuwu came home very late. As soon as he sat down on the sofa, Li Baoli took the initiative to walk over and squat down to help him take off his socks, her posture extremely low. But Ma Xiuwu dodged away, showing no gratitude. Seeing this, Li Baoli gave her son Xiaobao a meaningful look. Xiaobao glanced at Li Baoli and had no choice but to say, "Daddy, please don't be mad at Mom. Stop sleeping on the sofa." Ma Xiuwu listened to his son's words, but felt not the least bit moved. He knew this was Li Baoli's ruse to persuade him with her son. Not only did he show no mercy, he actually felt that doing so would only hurt his son. Li Baoli, whose plan had failed, was frustrated and immediately vented her anger on Xiaobao. She scolded her son not to cry. Listening to Xiaobao's heart-wrenching cries, Ma Xiuwu hid in the bathroom, too afraid to make a sound. He clenched his fists, his desire for divorce growing stronger and stronger. He had had enough of this oppressive life. He had also had enough of the days without dignity in marriage. The next day, Ma Xiuwu met Zhou Fun again at the factory. What surprised him was that Zhou Fun actually took the initiative to say happy birthday to him. This extremely simple blessing was like a master key, instantly unlocking Ma Xiuwu. The emotional floodgates he had been suppressed and frozen by Li Baoli for years finally opened. He looked at Zhou Fun's smiling, gentle eyes, and the already fragile defenses inside him collapsed completely immersing himself in the tenderness he had longed for. Since then, Ma Xiuwu always found excuses to come home late, either saying he needed to work overtime with his boss or saying there was a temporary task at the factory. Li Baoli realized Ma Xiuwu must be someone outside, but she didn't cry or fuss. Instead, she took a day off, went to school to pick up her son, and settled him at her friend's house. Then she headed straight to Ma Xiuwu's factory. She wanted to see with her own eyes who Ma Xiuwu was really with. Li Baoli waited at the factory entrance for a long time and finally saw Ma Xiuwu come out riding his bicycle. She quietly followed him until she turned into a small alley with Ma Xiuwu. She saw a young woman walking beside Ma Xiuwu, and the two naturally put their arms around each other, then walked into the hotel together. At that moment, Li Baoli felt as if all her strength had been drained. She collapsed to the ground, tears streaming uncontrollably. It's a feeling of being betrayed. It was like countless needles stabbing her heart. After crying for an unknown length of time, Li Baoli mustered the courage to walk into the hotel, forced herself to stay calm, chatted casually with the landlady, and in just a few words pulled out the room number Ma Xiuwu had booked with that woman. Li Baoli walked step by step to the door of room 206. Before she could knock, the sounds of sex came from that room. That voice was like a fire, instantly igniting all the suppression and anger in her heart. Losing control of her emotions, she called the police. After reporting to the police, Li Baoli was disheartened. She sat on the sofa at home all night until dawn. Suddenly, the phone at home rang. It was the director of Ma Xiuwu's factory. Li Baoli knew exactly what had happened, but she was so stubborn that she cared about her pride and didn't want to show weakness in front of others, so she forced herself to stay calm. She said, "As long as a woman takes the initiative to get close, which man wouldn't be moved? If someone is attractive to him, she can just ignore it." Ma Xiuwu asked for divorce again, his tone tinged with guilt, but also a hint of resolve. But Li Baoli acted as if she hadn't heard. She didn't shed a single tear, simply calmly letting Ma Xiaowu come home with her. The factory director and his colleagues were stunned. They thought Li Baoli would cause a scene, but unexpectedly, she was so understanding. Only Li Baoli herself knew that she was not sad. It was because she didn't want to show weakness in front of others, and even less did she want Ma Xiaowu to easily leave the marriage. She was convinced that as long as they didn't divorce, the family would still exist, and Ma Xiaowu would still be her husband. From then on, Ma Xiaowu's guilt grew heavier. He became even more timid in front of Li Baoli, not even daring to speak loudly. Li Baoli, holding leverage over Ma Xiaowu's infidelity, became even more arrogant. Sometimes, even in front of her best friend, she would mercilessly mock Ma Xiaowu. If he thinks his cooking isn't good, he'll have someone else cook for him. Her best friend couldn't stand it and quickly grabbed some food to interrupt, afraid they would start arguing again. Xiaobao also sensed the tense atmosphere and took the opportunity to pull Ma Xiaowu away, falsely claiming he had homework to be tutored. After the meal, her best friend earnestly persuaded Li Baoli again to treat Ma Xiaowu better, since life had to go on. Unexpectedly, he learned from Li Baoli that the complaint call was actually made by her. Her best friend thought she was crazy. She just doesn't want anyone to take Ma Xiaowu away. Her best friend asked, "What were you doing earlier? Why didn't you treat him well before? You have to make him come to you and not want to leave. That's your real skill." Li Baoli felt wronged and told her best friend. Back then, it was Ma Xiaowu who knelt on the ground, begging her to marry him, and even swore to treat her well for life. Moreover, given her looks, many people had pursued her back then. Choosing Ma Xiaowu, a countryman, was already a stroke of luck for him. Why should she treat Ma Xiaowu well first? Her best friend could only sigh helplessly after hearing this, saying Li Baoli was just too stubborn, always talking about who was superior or inferior, which made her unable to catch Ma Xiaowu. But Li Baoli simply wouldn't listen. She thought all men were this cheap, and that when he pursued her that way, hasn't he already fallen out of love now? Her best friend told her, "Don't compare Ma Xiaowu to Lu Dongfeng. Lu Dongfeng is just a scoundrel. Ma Xiaowu was forced into this state by you." Li Baoli felt her best friend was just talking nonsense, but she always stuck to her own ideas. She believed that marriage should be where the husband obeyed the wife, but never considered that marriage requires equality and mutual respect. She was even less aware of her own dominance and unreasonableness, and had long pushed Ma Xiaowu further away. Soon after, the factory's disciplinary action was issued. Zhou Fen was fired. Ma Xiaowu was demoted from workshop director to ordinary worker. Li Baoli thought the matter was settled, and as long as no one brought it up again, life would gradually improve. But she didn't expect that new conflicts would soon come knocking again. That night, Li Baoli came home from work. She met Ma Xiaowu's mother in the elevator. Her mother-in-law took the initiative to greet her, but Li Baoli, still holding back her anger, kept a dark face the whole time and didn't say a word. When he got home, Xiaobao saw his grandmother and immediately rushed over to hug her, his face full of joy. But Li Baoli kept a stern face and told Xiaobao to hurry back to his room to do his homework so he wouldn't interfere with his studies. Then she called Ma Xiaowu into the bedroom and asked why he brought his mother home without consulting her. Ma Xiaowu patiently explained, saying that his hometown was demolished and his house was gone. His mother had nowhere to stay, he was an only child, and his father had passed away early. As a son, he couldn't just ignore his mother, so he could only bring her to stay temporarily and then find a place to live later. But Li Baoli said, "No wonder you came to me last night to please me. After all this time, you just want to bring your mom here. What a pity, your guy really doesn't help you succeed." Faced with such blunt humiliation from his wife, Ma Xiaowu endured it. But Li Baoli had no intention of letting it go. She deliberately raised her voice. She revealed that Ma Xiaowu had been demoted for his infidelity. She wanted the mother-in-law outside to hear, to make Ma Xiaowu lose face in front of the family. Her mother-in-law heard everything clearly in the living room. To avoid putting her son in a difficult position, she took advantage of their argument in the bedroom and quietly slipped away. Ma Xiaowu chased after her, but could no longer find his mother. With tears in his eyes, he walked down the street, feeling like a useless person, unable to even fulfill the most basic filial duties. Fortunately, Xiaobao had sharp eyes. He found his grandmother hiding in a corner downstairs. No matter how forceful Li Baoli was, she couldn't drive an elderly person away in the middle of the night. Reluctantly, she added a bed in Xiaobao's room for him to stay temporarily. Ma Xiaowu looked at his mother, who was sobbing uncontrollably from the humiliation. He felt as if he had lost his soul. He couldn't understand how a good life had turned into this state. He couldn't help but wonder, if Li Baoli could be as gentle as Zhou Fen, maybe this family would be different. Early the next morning, Ma Xiaowu didn't go to work. Instead, he skipped work and went to find Zhou Fen. He felt he had dragged Zhou Fen into trouble and caused her to lose her job, and he was filled with guilt. He also confessed to Zhou Fen that his feelings for her were genuine, not a momentary move. But Zhou did not accept his confession. Instead, he calmly said to him, Ma Xiaowu, you're a pretty good person, but you don't really understand women. After hearing Zhou words, Ma Xiaowu felt a mix of emotions, but he never fully understood what she meant. He only felt that Li Bao's dominance was suffocating him. But they don't realize that their own avoidance is also a driving force behind their marriage's breakdown. After leaving Zhou, he rode his bicycle to the factory, pondering Zhou words repeatedly along the way, but never found an answer. But he didn't expect that an even heavier blow was still waiting for him. As soon as he arrived at the factory entrance, the director called out to him, his expression grave as he told him that the factory was laying off workers and that he had been placed on the laid-off list. This news struck like a bolt from the blue, leaving Ma Xiaowu dizzy. Family discord, caught cheating, demoted from workshop director to ordinary worker. Now I'm even losing my job. His long-held pride and self-respect completely collapsed at that moment. He felt like a joke. Anger, grievance, and despair flooded him like a tide. He didn't know how to face Li Bao, how to face his mother and son, and I don't know how I'll get through the days ahead. That afternoon, Ma Xiaowu did not go home, but came alone to the Yangtze River Bridge. After writing a suicide note, he ultimately chose to end his own life. After hearing the news, the director braved the heavy rain to find Li Bao. He asked her to go to the factory. At first, Li Bao thought Ma Xiaowu had made another mistake and was full of impatience. It wasn't until the police handed her a suicide note that she finally snapped out of it. In his farewell letter, Ma Xiaowu wrote, "Life is truly painful. Some things are hard to face. Mom, I'm sorry. I can't take care of you in your old age, and I still ask you to help me look after my little baby. Xiaobao, I'm sorry. From now on, you'll have to rely on yourself." Li Bao flipped through page by page until the very end. She couldn't find a single word related to herself. At that moment, Li Bao felt as if her heart had been gripped tightly, making it hard to breathe. She and Ma Xiaowu spent more than 10 years together, from squeezing into a communal apartment to moving to a new home, worrying herself about the family. Even though she often argued with Ma Xiaowu, she never thought about really breaking up the family. Now that Ma Xiaowu is gone, he won't even leave a single word in his will, as if she was never part of this family, as if these past decade or so had passed. This is all her solo performance. When handling the funeral, Ma Xiaowu's mother cried her heart out, repeatedly blaming herself for coming to the city and feeling she was holding her son back. Xiaobao threw himself onto Li Bao, crying and hitting her, shouting that she should give up her father's life. Only Li Bao didn't shed a single tear. Even now, she is still more confused than sad. She couldn't understand how tomorrow's easy was supposed to get better. So how could things suddenly turn out like this? She couldn't understand why Ma Xiaowu insisted on getting divorced. She was even more puzzled as to why he would jump into the river to commit suicide. Her best friend Xiao Jing, worried that Li Bao might be upset, came to comfort her out of kindness. But Li Bao stubbornly insisted she would never shed tears for a man like Ma Xiaowu. She was still immersed in her own lot. Xiao Jing interrupted her, looking serious. She was a Feng Shui believer, and the first time she visited Li Bao's new home, she felt something was off. Look back yourself. You wish 7 or 8 roads would crash down from inside your house or downstairs. There are all kinds of directions. What is this called in Feng Shui? Do you know that? 1,000 arrows pierce the heart. Xiao Jing thought it was because the Feng Shui of Li Bao's new house was bad, which caused so many troubles at home. But Li Bao didn't believe in any of this. I just don't believe in this kind of superstition. Gone and died. Who says it's like 1,000 arrows piercing the heart? Ma Xiaowu jumped into the river, and I had to shine on Grandma and Xiaobao. The more I had to say, this was a dazzling brilliance. Although she spoke firmly, Li Bao felt an unprecedented loneliness inside. But she had no other choice. She could only grit her teeth and persevere. That night, grandmother held her grandson Xiaobao and firmly declared she would follow her son's last wish and stay in the city to accompany Xiaobao until he grew up. Li Bao looked at her mother-in-law's haggard appearance, but didn't object. She knew this family needed her. She is someone who can put Xiaobao at ease. But soon, the pressure of reality made it hard for her to breathe. With her current income from selling socks, her monthly salary was nowhere near enough to support 3 people. She remembered chatting with her friend Sister He before. The seller said that when the carrying pole business was good, he could earn 2,000 yuan a month, which was much better than selling socks. So the next day, she quit her job selling socks. However, while making carrying poles brings quick money, it is a real test of physical strength. Li Bao had never done heavy labor since childhood and initially found it hard to adapt. But thinking about Xiaobao still in school and her mother-in-law's poor health, she gritted her teeth and persevered. She was so exhausted every day that she fell asleep as soon as she collapsed, but always remembered to put all the money she earned on the table and let her mother-in-law keep. When her best friend found out she was working as a carrying pole, she drove to find her, saying she wanted to arrange a decent job for her and didn't want her to work so hard. But Li Baoli smiled and said she wasn't born into a spoiled young lady. She often helped her mother pick vegetables as a child, so this hardship was nothing. Actually, she said this because she didn't want to owe anyone a favor, nor did she want others to feel sorry for her. Day by day, Li Baoli's life gradually became orderly. The only thing that made her uncomfortable was her son Xiaobao's attitude toward her. During this meal, she felt something was off. When she turned around, she saw Xiaobao had placed Ma Xiaowu's portrait facing the dining table. She felt uncomfortable and asked Xiaobao to put the photos away, but unexpectedly, she was met with strong opposition from him. When she came out after her shower, she discovered that the portrait had been placed on her bed again. Li Baoli felt a sharp pain in her heart and hid the portrait in a cabinet. She couldn't understand why. Despite her fighting for the family, her son still couldn't understand her. She could only comfort herself. Maybe when Xiaobao grows up, he would understand her intentions. Fortunately, Xiaobao's academic performance has always been excellent. Every time she receives her report card, she feels full of motivation. Wow, my little Bao is #1 again. And so, she carried her shoulder pole for 10 years. Time has etched its marks on her face, and Xiaobao grew from a naive child into a senior high school student. But over these 10 years, Xiaobao has always treated her coldly. Even a simple word of concern will annoy him. Since I was little, besides asking myself, "Have you finished your homework? Have you finished your homework? Can you say something else? I'm just concerned about you. If you care, you have to focus on the point. Say you lack education. By now, I've basically settled on the form. As a parent, as long as it doesn't affect their son's mood, that's enough." Li Baoli was left speechless by their words and could only quietly help Xiaobao close the door, feeling deeply wronged. She just wanted to care for her son, but didn't know how to do it. What she didn't know was that Xiaobao was flipping through an old dictionary in his room. Inside was a photo of Zhou Fun. He stared at the photo for a long time, as if secretly making up some kind of resolution. Li Baoli had no choice but to ask her best friend Xiao Jing for help, hoping that Xiao Jing, as her godmother, could persuade Xiaobao. Xiao Jing readily agreed. She is no longer what she once was. Busin has replaced it with a BMW. Although her husband still had questionable character, he was willing to spend money on her, and their life was fairly respectable. She took Xiaobao to a restaurant and looked at him sitting silently. Xiao Jing quietly asked why he was so cold toward his mother. Xiaobao looked up and asked, "Why did Dad commit suicide back then?" Xiao Jing was taken aback, then considered and said Ma Xiu jumped into the river because the factory was about to lay off his job. Grandma said it was because Mom treated Dad badly. Your grandmother is wrong. Your mom does have a bit of a bad temper, but there's a reason for that. Forget it. You're too young, and there are many things you don't fully understand. You'll understand when you grow up. Xiao Jing earnestly advised Xiaobao to treat his mother better. She said that over the past 10 years, Li Baoli has braved wind and rain for this family, which has truly been difficult. She reminded Xiaobao that when he succeeded in the future, he would make sure to honor his mother. Xiaobao didn't answer directly, just quietly kept his head down and ate. Meanwhile, Li Baoli was eating fried rice at a roadside stall, but when she looked up, she saw her old acquaintance, Jianjian. Jianjian used to be a street thug living off rent, and later was sentenced to 10 years for fighting. Now that he has been released from prison, he has started a logistics business and even started driving a small truck. The two started chatting in the car. When talking about carrying a shoulder pole, Jianjian advised her to find something else to do, saying times have changed. Now everyone uses logistics, and carrying a shoulder pole will eventually be phased out. But Li Baoli looked completely confused. He didn't know what else he could do besides carrying a carrying pole. From then on, Jianjian often came to see Li Baoli. Li Baoli could feel that Jianjian was interested in her. She had been a widow for 10 years and wanted someone to rely on, but whenever she thought of Xiaobao, but he felt he couldn't do it. One day, Jianjian insisted on taking Li Baoli home, but ended up driving into an empty parking lot. Jianjian suddenly kissed her forcefully. At first, Li Baoli refused, but thinking of her 10 years of loneliness and grievance. In the end, she half-heartedly gave in. Afterwards, Li Baoli was filled with regret, feeling she had let Ma Xiuwu down, and even more so Xiaobao. This guilt gnawed at her heart like a worm, so she began deliberately avoiding Jianjian. Soon, the college entrance exam approached, and Li Baoli simply stopped working. She wanted to make some delicious food for Xiaobao at home and spend more time with him. But my mother-in-law was very dissatisfied with her behavior. A few days ago, you kept wandering around the house so as not to disturb my mood. He doesn't need you, whether it's going out to work or have fun. Can we wait until he's over the college entrance exam before coming back? Did Xiaobao say that? He didn't say anything, mainly because he couldn't tell. Her mother-in-law's words pierced Li Baoli's heart like a fine needle. She recalled the past 10 years, when she carried a shoulder pole through the streets and alleys every day. Her shoulders scraped raw. Her soles had blisters, and no matter how tired she was, she didn't dare rest for a day, just wanting to earn more money so Xiaobao could live better. But now, wanting to spend a few more days with the child, she has become a burden affecting his mood. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. Could it be that just because Ma Xiaowu left, she, as a mother, no longer had the right to stay at home? Although she felt deeply wronged, she knew now was not the time to be upset. Xiaobao's college entrance exam was more important than anything else. So she had no choice but to grab her carrying pole and walk out the door. But walking down the street, Li Baoli didn't know where to go. She gave all the money she earned to her mother-in-law, wanted to call Xiao Jing, but didn't know how to start. At that moment, she saw Jianjian's car parked by the roadside, but she didn't see Jianjian's person. She asked a nearby worker and learned that Jianjian had drunk too much and accidentally fell and injured himself. Li Baoli hesitated for a long time, but finally, driven by some fate, came to Jianjian's residence. She saw Jianjian sitting on the bed, the room in complete disarray, and felt a bit sorry for her. So she stayed behind to help him tidy up the house. Two people who had been worn down by life found a bit of comfort in this shabby little house and naturally settled down together. But they never expected that the day before the college entrance exam, an accident would happen. The mother-in-law suddenly fell ill. Xiaobao couldn't find Li Baoli anywhere, but eventually found Jianjian's home through Jianjian's workers. When Xiaobao saw Li Baoli and Jianjian together, he instantly understood everything. Li Baoli was flustered and extremely embarrassed. When I heard my son say that grandma was sick and hospitalized, she immediately hurriedly got dressed, preparing to rush to the hospital. But the angry Xiaobao suddenly shouted at Jianjian, "Shameless!" The two immediately started wrestling with each other, and Li Baoli was anxious nearby. Without thinking, Li Baoli grabbed a bottle and smashed it at Jianjian's head. Jianjian's brothers heard the commotion and rushed in, but Li Baoli blocked Xiaobao's way and told Jianjian that there was an urgent matter at home and asked him to let her go first. After that, whether she paid compensation or apologized, she accepted everything. Jianjian saw Li Baoli's anxious expression and finally softened his heart, asking his brothers to let them go. After leaving, Li Baoli kept apologizing to Xiaobao, saying she shouldn't have let him see all this. She begged him not to affect tomorrow's college entrance exam. But Xiaobao didn't say a word and walked forward without looking back. The next day, sitting in her mother-in-law's hospital room, Li Baoli looked especially haggard and aged. She couldn't understand why. For most of her life, she had devoted herself diligently to her family. How did she end up living in such a miserable state? Soon after, the college entrance exam ended, and Xiaobao did not disappoint everyone by winning the provincial top scorer with excellent results. When the co-workers heard the news, they all came to congratulate Li Baoli, saying she could finally enjoy a good life. Li Baoli smiled and thanked her, but felt little joy inside, because Xiaobao asked him to come home for dinner that evening, saying he had something important to talk to her. On her way home, she ran into Jianjian. She took out the medical bills she had prepared long ago from her pocket and handed them to Jianjian. But Jianjian pushed him away, his tone tinged with teasing. "You sleep with me anyway, so I won't lose out. Don't waste my money." Jianjian's words were like a needle tempered in ice, piercing straight into Li Baoli's heart. She thought Jianjian had feelings for her, but she didn't realize that, in his eyes, their relationship was just a transaction. "I'm leaving, huh? If I had known I was going out to sell, I would have been in such a miserable situation today." But this man only told her not to cry, not to act like she was very emotional. "All right, Jianjian, thank you. You're absolutely right. Talking about relationships is too costly. Just be clear." Composing herself, Li Baoli went home. On the table were several simple dishes and a bottle of wine. Xiaobao sat by the table, with Ma Xiaowu's portrait placed in front of him. Before dinner, Xiaobao picked up his wine glass and toasted the portrait, saying he had gotten into a good university and hadn't let his father down. Li Baoli also raised her glass and toasted her mother-in-law, thanking her for all her efforts over the years. After hearing this, my mother-in-law's eyes reddened as she said, "Li Baoli hasn't had it easy these past years. She knows this well." Hearing her mother-in-law's approval, Li Baoli felt a warmth in her heart. Just as she was about to toast Ma Xiaowu, Xiaobao suddenly spoke up. "What right do you have to toast my dad? I toast you. I'll have a drink with you. From now on, you are no longer my mother." It's all because of you that I haven't had a father for 10 years. Now I've finally grown up, got into university. I don't want you to pay me tuition. I have scholarships. I can still work, and I don't want you to interfere. The house was left by my dad. You move out, and I'll live with my grandmother. Li Baoli couldn't believe her ears. Looking at her son, who was both familiar and strange, her heart ached as if cut by a knife. She wanted to get angry, wanted to question Xiaobao, but when she was about to speak, she choked up. This was her son, the son she had raised with over 10 years of hard work. She couldn't bear to scold him, nor could she bear to hit him. Li Baoli once again went to her best friend to cry, saying that after 10 years of hard work, she never expected to end up like this. Her friend was very angry after hearing this, saying she would help her find a lawyer, and said that Xiaobao, as her son, had a duty to support her, and even if Li Baoli went to court, she could still win. Then her best friend started talking about the house's Feng Shui, saying that the house was like 1,000 arrows piercing the heart and ruining Li Baoli's life. But Li Baoli still didn't believe it. 10 years ago, she didn't believe it, and even now, she still doesn't believe it. After returning home, Li Baoli called Xiaobao up to the rooftop. Looking at her son, who was already taller than herself, her grievances and anger finally erupted. Mom asks you, I gave birth to you and raised you. I've lived for you most of my life. Do you have any conscience? I thought you were still naive. Yesterday, I pretended I never said anything. I asked a lawyer about the house. I'm your mother. I'm raising you, and you have the obligation to support me. Even if it were a lawsuit, you wouldn't win. We are mother and son, the closest bond in the world. Please don't hurt me anymore. Xiaobao took a photo out of his pocket, and the person in the photo was Zhou Fun. When Li Baoli saw the photo, her anger flared up again, saying that Zhou Fun had ruined the family. But Xiaobao looked at her with disappointment in his eyes, questioning who had really ruined the family. It was only then that Li Baoli realized Xiaobao had already sought out Zhou Fun and learned the truth behind the report back then. Back then, before Ma Xiaowu committed suicide, he had visited Zhou Fun. He learned from Zhou Fun that the person who reported them was Li Baoli. Later, Ma Xiaowu even went to the hotel to confirm the matter. Upon learning the truth, he was utterly desperate and ultimately chose to jump into the river. I finally understood why my father committed suicide. I just realized how cunning you really are. I've never understood why my dad didn't leave a single word for you in his will. Grandma said it was because Dad had a woman outside, and she was sorry to you. Later, I finally understood. Dad jumped into the river all because you ruined his life, yet he pretended to be a good person who forgave and tolerated him. Dad knows you hurt him, and he's in deep pain and despair. Do you understand? Every word Xiaobao said was like a knife, deeply piercing Li Baoli's heart. She remembered Ma Xiaowu's awkward expression when he was teased by workers, his resolute attitude when he asked for divorce, his timid demeanor after being demoted, and the guilt he wrote in his will to his mother and son. It turned out that over those years, Ma Xiaowu's grievances and repression had long accumulated to the peak, and her report became the final force that pushed him into the abyss. Li Baoli always felt like a victim in this marriage, believing Ma Xiaowu had wronged her, but she never reflected on her own dominance and harshness. She was used to speaking to Ma Xiaowu in a commanding tone, used to ignoring his dignity, and used to imposing her own ideas on him. Even after his affair, he never thought about communicating properly. She retaliated by reporting in such an extreme way. She thought she had won, but in the end, she lost her entire family. That night, Li Baoli did not come home. She walked alone to the Yangtze River Bridge, just like Ma Xiaowu had done back then. The river wind remains icy cold, and the water remains swift as ever. Looking at the city lights in the distance, she felt for the first time that her life was truly pierced by 1,000 arrows, just as her best friend had said. At that moment, the night sky suddenly lit up with dazzling fireworks, and a young man ran over smiling to ask her to help take photos. Looking at the bright smiles of the young children, Li Baoli suddenly felt that she was still needed. She hadn't experienced this feeling in a long time. At that moment, she suddenly let go. Maybe her life wasn't meant to be like this. She shouldn't have revolved around Xiaobao and this broken home. Early the next morning, Li Baoli returned home and began packing her things. She took out the property deed and handed it to her mother-in-law, asking Xiaobao to transfer the house to his name when he had time. My mother-in-law watched her pack her things. She hurriedly tried to persuade her to stay, saying Xiaobao was just too young and would definitely regret it when he grew up. But Li Baoli shook her head, saying she knew Xiaobao hadn't been happy all these years and had never laughed or gone crazy like other kids. If her departure can make Xiaobao happy, she was willing to do so. She put her cherished wedding photos, as well as pictures of Xiaobao as a child, into her suitcase. Over the past 10 years, she has carried countless carrying poles and moved countless people's belongings. But this is the first time she has carried her own luggage. Her mother-in-law continued to persuade her, saying that once Xiaobao became mature in college, he would definitely come back to find her. Li Baoli sighed, saying that if she had let go earlier when Ma Shuwu brought up divorce back then, maybe everyone would have lived better and wouldn't have so many regrets. Just as she was about to leave, her mother-in-law suddenly called out to her, asking if she had anything left to tell Xiaobao. After going downstairs, Li Baoli was surprised that Jianjian was waiting for her downstairs. Li Baoli didn't want to get entangled with him any longer and turned to leave, but Jianjian grabbed her tightly. Jianjian lowered his head and apologized to her, saying he shouldn't have said those hurtful things last time, and also said that if she was upset, she would slap him twice to vent her anger. Stop always joking around with me. I'm just unlucky, and now I'm standing in this place where countless arrows pierce my heart, and you're still standing in front of me. We've all lived half our lives. Who is really better than the other? Damn it, you're pierced by 1,000 arrows. Losing has never come. I don't believe in superstition. I'm not afraid. Li Baoli took one last look at the home she had once lived in, then got into Jinjian's car. But after driving just a couple of steps, the car suddenly stalled. With no other choice, Li Baoli got out of the car and used her hands. Used to carrying shoulder poles, she pushed the cart with all her might. Fortunately, after some effort, the car started again, taking Li Baoli away from the place that had caused her pain for over a decade, and set off on a hopeful new life that belonged to her. This may not be a perfect end, yet this has the most genuine warmth. Li Baoli's life was once pierced by countless arrows, but she was not defeated. She carried a family with 10 years of carrying a pole, and with her last stubbornness, chose to live for herself. Those past pains and resentments, those guilts became marks in her life, making her cherish the warmth before her even more. Just like that van that needs a push to start. Life may not always be smooth, but as long as you don't give up and someone is willing to push with you, you can keep moving forward.